Welcome to this episode of the Million Dollar Mastermind, where we get real world insights on winning from people who have accomplished amazing things. I'm your host, Larry Weidel, and let's get going. I'm talking with Mitch Joel, and he's sharing his insights from running an agency, but also he's the founder of 6 Pixels Group. And he speaks, he writes, he's got 2 bestsellers. One is 6 Pixels, the other 6 Pixels of Separation. The other one is Control, Alt, Delete, both bestsellers. And he's got the longest running, would you call it business podcast?
Yeah, business podcast, yeah.
Longest running business podcast out there, and he's learned some things along the way in doing all these things. And we were talking, he was making the point about I like the way you put it, Mitch, being willing to go long and deep, even when it seems, how did you say? Even when it seems wrong or when it seems a lost cause?
Neither of those. Just in the point where most people would say, you know what, I'm going to look for another job. Try to solve it. See what the real resolution is. And again, again, Seth Godin had this great small book called The Dip, and it's when do you stop and when do you keep going? And again, I was like this before I read it. The book was just very validating to the way that I think. But there's a lot of power in that, in just sitting in it and not just quitting because there's the opportunity next door, which may be more money or more status.
You look like Seth a little bit.
Yeah, Seth and I share. I mean, I've been very fortunate to get to know Seth over the years. In fact, we shared speaking bureau for a long time, and I would jokingly tell them that I was the white, bald Jewish version of Seth Godin, meaning the exact same thing. The cheaper version usually, but we often do joke about that.
And so when you go, a lot of things that impact us and, really we're difference makers in our career, we kind of ignore as we are on our way climbing the ladder, trying to establish ourselves. Something somebody says, something somebody did, convergence of circumstances or something, we just kind of took it for granted and ran with it because that's all we knew how to do. But upon reflection, the reason I wrote my book and the reason I do this podcast is like I had a really serious cycling accident about 14 years ago, shut my butt down. And I'm sitting on the couch and watching television, I'm sure there's good stuff, but not with commercials, because somehow the commercial, they have the intelligentsia of marketing with TV commercials is that once is not okay. In fact, 1,000 times not okay. The same commercials got to be played hundreds of thousands of times, preferably in the same 30-minute show. And watching like the commercials repeated right on cycle, one right after another, the same commercial. I said, I got to do something different. So that's what propelled me into, Twitter and Facebook and writing and the podcast and other things. But, in that process, it made me, the self-reflection, which is, I know, what happens to all of us when we're reading. You basically have a conversation going with somebody new and they challenge you to think of something, they're educating you. But one of the light bulbs that went on is like, I'm sitting on a whole lot of knowledge that I would have never gotten if there hadn't been like 4 or 5 people that came along and did something, said something, helped me out. They saw something in me and, had a smile, had an encouragement at the right time, and made me want to do more on giving back. You've talked about the fact that you've always done a lot of community service, and you've also talked about learning. Reading and learning is not enough. You got to put it into action. You got to pass it on to other people. One of the things I say, Mitch, is that You can't win without the fundamentals, but it's what you do with the fundamentals is where you start to have a chance at greatness. It's using the fundamentals, not just learning the fundamentals. And so, and part of that is when you start explaining to other people, it causes you to get more mentally organized in what you're really trying to say. Otherwise, they'll give you that dull look, and you're not going to get the response you want. I'm sure you look back in your upbringing and you saw some, upon reflection, you can see some things that were difference makers for you. Any that jump into your mind?
I mean, there's so many. I mean, where does one start? Or, is this nature or nurture? Is that the question? It's very hard to know.
What specifically was the nurture, See, I've got to ask you questions that you're not used to getting.
Look, I'd love to say that that's true. I think over the years, I've been asked pretty much anything I can be asked. I often reflect on what is nature and what is nurture. The nature aspect is I grew up in a family with three siblings. We grew up in a community that had more, at least optically to me, than we had, which created a drive for me. And it wasn't a drive driven by physical items or financial gain. It was simply me looking at these other people and thinking, they're not that different from me. They're not smarter. They're not more educated. Their kids aren't, we're all in the same environment, which means that that's attainable. So when we talk about communities right now, and in America in particular, and Canada is not absolved of this, where we look at these communities that are truly suffering, if there isn't even the belief that there's an end because everybody's in that cycle of discrimination and poverty, it's very hard to break it and be, oh, I don't want to say it's systemic. I don't want to say it's this. It is. It completely is. And so, to quote Shawshank Redemption, right? Hope. We're talking about, what are we talking about? Hope. The barrier for me to see success wasn't a big level of hope or a leap because of just dynamic exposure of luck, genetic lottery, et cetera, et cetera. So you're already starting on third base, now whether you take advantage of it or not, you can go back to second, you can get knocked out of the game. Lots of things can happen. So there's the nature of that environment. There's the nature of seeing peers, family succeed, not succeed, the dynamics of that. And then there's the drive. Give every kid you have $1 million. Some of them will blow it and become drug addicts. Some of them will take that and turn it into $1 billion. Nature or nurture, Larry, you tell, right? It's hard to know. So the lessons, my big thing is, even when we talk about, people talk about best practices and case studies, I don't know how practical they are. I don't know if I believe in my path is like, how is this possible that you're going to take anybody, even if I look at my own siblings and look at these completely different career paths and chartered, and we all grew up in the same house. So I don't know that any of the things I've learned are really transferable. What I do believe is that the things I've done, if somebody else hasn't done them, can't hurt if you try them. And so when I think of that, it's analogous to dieting. I could lose, I definitely put on my COVID-19. I took that seriously. I put on my COVID-19, and, should I go paleo? Should I go carb free? Should I go, it doesn't matter. Just choose one, because what's going to happen is by choosing one, your habits are going to change. And by your habits changing, your body will change, your physicality will change. And I believe it's that exposure that most people don't realize. They want the hack, the productivity hack, the listicle article, the Mitch, just give me the 5 things I need to do. And the answer is, if you almost do anything, it will probably be better than where you are. So I don't know that my path is unique. I don't know that my path to success was charted and defined. There's a lot of privilege, a lot of luck. There's definitely work that went into it. There's definitely new ways of thinking about it versus how maybe others would have thought of it. But I don't know if these are learnable lessons that are going to add value to someone else. I don't know if I believe in that.
Yeah, but there are winning strategies and mentalities. Like if you're playing chess, there's patterns, not exactly copy the same game, because that's one
But
reason I
Larry, if
do.
you're, but again, I'll push back on that. If you're a
Yeah.
narcissist, it's
Yeah.
not going to work. Like you
Yeah.
won't be able to see the opportunity.
Right.
So when
Right.
people say that to me, I'm like, I don't know. I think that there are many
Yeah,
people.
you cannot not put out, pass on things that made a difference to you with someone because of narcissists.
No, but what I mean
narcissist type
someone's,
thing is just
yeah,
everything's down the toilet off the
no,
thing there.
I just mean that the
And I'll tell you
lessons.
this. I had a I won't say who, a young relative of mine, and he was going through a drug thing in and out of jail. And he never really did anything wrong other than he was just a dumbass. And when he get in front of the judge, instead of being contrite, he would be belligerent. And then, of course, they would give him the maximum for nothing. And during that time, we would have talked. I was one person he would talk to until I realized he's not that way now. He's made it unbelievably, it is a total flip. I think it's the beatings he got in prison. But the thing is that I would have a conversation with him and we like boom, 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 boom. And he would take, because he was in that narcissist mode, he would take it and flip it and use it against his parents. Like, but mom told me this and told me that. It's like, no. So they're not going to, their receptors are not the same as you got to assume you're dealing with someone who is at least neutral when it comes to emotional stability.
Yeah, and I think where I was getting to is, will success result if I do these things? The answer is I don't know.
No,
I do know that if you just start reading books,
right,
and start creating something in content, it will unlock something that will be different than what you were doing before. Yeah. And I often reflect on this story. I'll get back to Jeffrey Gitomer from the Sales Bible and the Little Red Book of Selling. I've had him on my show countless times. Lucky enough to become friends with him. He's a very funny individual, and some would acknowledge as one of the greatest sales leaders there are or have ever will be in the world. And he would reflect on this story about how his dad come home, and classic, Jeffrey's older than I am, and you can imagine the war era parent coming back after a long day work, taking off the shoes, sitting with the pipe on the chair with the newspaper and the dog. And he'd always be writing notes, like just taking notes and notes. And Jeffrey recalls looking back and saying, Pops, like, what are you doing over there? And he'd always say to Jeffrey, I'm doing my homework. And what he was doing was making his to-do list for the next day, the people he's got to call. And it was a lesson to Jeffrey that became a lesson to me that, just because you finish school doesn't mean you don't have homework. That's a lesson I try to teach to my kids. Like when they come into this room, because now I don't go to the office as much as I used to, and I've got my notebooks and my things out. What are you doing? I'm doing my homework. I want them to know that it's not this hard thing that they have to do after work is finished. It's a thing you're doing to be better, more prepared. And there's something to be said about the lessons of that. Now, how many people do you know, Larry, that finished school and said, I'm never doing homework again. Right. I'm never reading another book again. I read enough. That's great. And maybe they're very successful too. It's just another clue from another perspective, another way to think about it that might unlock something that might really be the answer to tremendous success in your life.
Yeah, you have to work out your own success. And that's one of the great things. I can't thank you enough for making that point and insisting on it, because you're just not going to find a formula that fits your life. In fact, even in our business where we have multiple organizations, we're always figuring things out and copying details from each other. I tell people, look, I couldn't even copy myself. What I did,
exactly.
You know what I'm saying? I was, what I did was a response to where we were in production, the people, the resources, the time of the year. And it's the kind of thing where it's constant adjustment, thinking on your feet, but you have the end result in line of where you want to go.
Sure.
But you're going to have to be adjusting the rest of your life. Because I've done the same thing. Like, I am sick and tired of learning.
Well, also, I feel like when I look at successful people and what they've done, it feels like they're always the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
And it feels like we believe that there's this rule of success. Like we lump everybody into the same category and call it success. But every story that you uncover, they're the exception. They're not the, so I'm going to, would I bank everything on the exception? No. So what, it creates a different thought pattern. And so that's why I love having conversations like this and then doing them, on my own show too, because you start uncovering so many exceptions. Now, are there underlying skills? There are. And I think we covered them. This, when you start learning, you can start teaching. When you start learning and teaching, you start meeting and building this network. When you start building this network, you develop a foundational community. And then if you can add some fiscal responsibility layered on top of that, there's a really good model for anybody. The problem with the model is it's kind of boring. It's the stuff it's the stuff you literally learned in elementary school. And it's literally what it is. And so we tend to think, well, that can't work anymore. We need this thing or that. And there's nuances there. Are you in the right physical geography with the right industry, with the right problem, with the right, all of those things are very, very true. All of them.
Nobody's going to be able to come in and give you an easy answer, a hack for where you can move forward in your life. That wraps up this episode. Consider leaving a rating and review if you like what you heard. In addition, I have a free video for you, and it contains my best insights from 20 years of running my own business and also coaching $1 million earners. You'll find it at whiteelonwinning.com/webinar. Thanks for listening, and do it big.